He slid a manila envelope across my kitchen table like a parting gift. Inside, a $10,000 allowance for the $5 million ranch my own son had sold behind my back. Dad, take the 10 grand and stop making this hard. That sentence didn't just bruise, it split something open. By Christmas, the water under my land would tell the truth. The law would carry the weight, and every secret they'd buried would have to breathe. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. Cold sits lightly on the hills the week before Christmas, the kind of clean Texas cold that sharpens every sound. I wake before first light and set Lena's brass percolator on the stove. The dent on its belly fits my thumb like a worry stone. When the perk turns from chatter to tick, I pour into a chipped mug and stand at the sink, watching frost breathe across the trellis lines that climb our limestone slope. The vineyard holds its breath with me. Posts throw long blue shadows. Wires sing where the north wind touches them. I walk the rows with a pocket wrench and the small ledger the AG Bank gave me years ago. Moisture probes blink green confirmations. I tap each manifold, listening for the polite hiss of pressure through the drip lines, a farmer's stethoscope. A frost fan clacks twice, then settles. Work is a metronome that keeps grief on time. I tighten clips, reset a wire rattle where hogs nose the edge, kneel to read hoofprints in a pale seam of dust. I hear Lena as if she just set down her pruning knife. Prune to let the light through. She'd add, leave enough leaf for the heat. I am only checking lines, but I still look for places where light belongs. I jot readings, soil temps, flow rates, fuel for the pump, and note to order end caps before New Year. By 8, the coffee has gone thin. I fry 2 eggs, butter a heel of bread, and listen to the county station describe a front sliding down. Blue norther on the way, the announcer says, cheerful as a man selling nails. Fredericksburg is lit. A bakery radio leaks carols, and the square is wrapped in warm electric. I mean to drop a crate of late harvest grapes at the church potluck and check the manger set. Books first, before the day scatters. Numbers calm me. Diesel invoices, a note on micron filters, last week's tie wire. The banker still calls me Mr. Sam Hardline and laughs, you squeeze a nickel till it yelps. I wear it like a cotton shirt, plain and suitable. I balance the month to the dollar and pencil a fuel lock at a number I can live with. Sentimental with people, exacting with money. Lena used to say, both kept us married. I make a round of the outbuildings and end under the windmill tower. The storm bunker door sits squared in shade. I check the hasp and go down iron steps into cool air that smells like river rock. On the shelf is a small safe, and inside it what I call the dry things. Lena's journals wrapped in blue cloth, a trail cam hard drive crowded with midnight trespasses, and a steel tag stamped with the number of our safe deposit box in town. Truth sleeps dry down here. The sun widens and lays a ladder of light up the hill. I mend a cracked emitter near the lower pump house, wipe my palms on my jeans, and watch a coyote read the fence line like a private letter. When you are 70, routine is a form of prayer. Inventory the shed, count sleeves of connectors. Set aside spools of irrigation tape for the high school AG class. In the shop, I oil Lena's loppers and lay a rag across their jaws. My father's maxim returns and sits at the table of my mind. Land, water, name. Keep all three or you're only camping. I say it again, softer. Keep all three. I have tried to keep all three, sometimes by being hard when tenderness would have bought me better sleep. Late morning brings only wind here, whirring grass into a whisper. The mailbox gives up a seed catalog, a Christmas card from a neighbor in cursive, an insurance brochure shaped like a trap. I leave the card by the percolator and fold the brochure once before dropping it in the trash. This land taught me the difference between paper comfort and real. I walk the boundary because walking it keeps me honest about distance. The line jogs at the Chinaberry and falls to the draw where water remembers old courses. The north draw is shade at noon. The air tastes of iron and leaf. I stand where drip lines slip under the bank, listening for the regular tick that means a valve is behaving. I don't plan to leave this place except the way a man ought to leave, on a quiet morning after a tidy evening. There is work enough to carry me there. The olive press needs a gasket. The south fence leans like a drunk uncle after church barbecue. I make lists so the lists don't make me. At the house again, the window over the sink holds a dull reflection of trellis in my shoulders. The light has flattened, the day is turning. Above the ridge, a hawk draws a ring you could hang a plain wedding band on if you trusted air that much. The wind sharpens and the world pulls tight, the way canvas pulls when a front comes over prairie. Land, water, name, I say. Not as a vow, but as inventory. I touch the pocket where the bunker key rides, and the old habit settles me. Far out on the road, gravel speaks under tires, or maybe it's my mind learning to hear what's already coming. Either way, I rinse the mug, set it upside down on the towel, and listen to the house hold still. Afternoon, the light went flat, winter glare collapsing distance. Wind threaded the eaves and tapped the stovepipe. I heard gravel long before any knock, a hiss braided into the road. When the black SUV turned off the county lane, sun flashed across a hood polished to a mirror. They stopped where Lena once cooled crates. Brooke stepped out first, scarf exact, phone already in her hand. Caleb followed, jaw tight, eyes skipping the trellis lines like a student avoiding a teacher's look. I didn't invite them. Silence needed to measure what could cross my threshold. They came anyway, and the house took their cold like a barn-taking wind. Brooke set a designer tote on a chair as if planting a flag. Caleb sat with the posture of a man rehearsed to deliver bad news. A manila envelope slid across the table, its corner ticking the wood. Inside lay a cashier's check and papers that spoke in completed verbs. The memo used a banker's euphemism, but my hand heard allowance. I kept my palm on my mug, not on their paper. We sold the ranch to Silver Mesa. 5 million, handovers the 26th, Caleb said. There's a senior community in Austin. The room narrowed. Brooke's voice arrived already ironed. It's legal. Power of attorney after your June fall, physician noted decline. I looked at my son and kept my voice level. In June, I replaced a cracked emitter, 42 psi. I said, no fall. He flinched the way a man does when a small truth knocks an excuse out of square. Brooke's phone lit with a name I didn't know. She turned it face down. Caleb glanced at the wall clock that ticks loud over pump noise. I opened the envelope and let the papers lie. The notary seal's font belonged to courthouse walls, but the date sat wrong in my bones. One page used the word facility the way a brochure uses mercy. My father's maxim lined up in my head: land, water, name, and I held to the mug's heat. Hungry? I asked, because hospitality was the smallest boundary left to draw. They had eaten. They asked to inventory, to walk the property, to make a list for movers. I let the silence say no. The wind lifted and fell like a hand testing a latch. They shifted to logistics, dates, movers, forwarding, turned-down services in a building that called itself community. I counted backward on a different clock. Bank hours, courthouse windows, ranger shifts, the church rehearsal that would put me downtown when I might need to be. The 26th hammered itself into the calendar of my mind. I set it next to fuel deliveries and the way blue northers march. Caleb pointed at a line pretending to be care. A stipend to cover transition, $10,000 in the meantime. I pushed the envelope back along the grain so the table would remember which way home runs. I hear you, I said. That sentence admits a sound, not a decision. It kept my kitchen mine. They stood. Brooke smoothed her scarf. Caleb looked toward the sink window and away again. He named a time for movers the way men set meetings in software. Their shoes laid city-flat thumps on the porch. The SUV glided backward and slid down the caliche, dust rising, then drifting low across the yard. Quiet returned in pieces, the wall clock, the stove metal ticking cool, the small breath a house takes when it has its shape back. I rinsed my mug, dried it with a towel worn thin in the middle, and set it in its place because names and places keep each other honest. The envelope went on the counter where the church crate had waited. I pocketed the bunker key the way a swimmer pockets a lungful. At the ledger, I wrote the date and 2 words, afternoon visitors, no more, no less. The page took the graphite and made it fact. I stood at the sink and let the window show me my ground, trellis lines, olive leaves with a winter sheen, the windmill's slow, stubborn tick. I thought of Caleb at 12 counting grape clusters and asking why drought water tastes like stone, of Brooke's phone going dark face down, of the seal's date I didn't trust and the word facility that didn't belong in my vocabulary. I thought of the bunker under the windmill, the trail cam hard drive stacked with night, and the steel tag stamped with a number only Lena and I ever said out loud. Land, water, name. I said it under my breath the way a man inventories tools at dusk. The day had announced a new kind of work. I set the mug upside down on the towel and planned tomorrow in hours. A courthouse morning, even if one judge shut the door, a call to Marty at the cafe, a visit to a lawyer who can tell a real signature from a story. The wind flexed once along the eaves. I let the sound pass through and kept the house still. Morning arrived rinsed and cold, the kind of light that makes edges honest. I poured black coffee and let it stand a minute while I laced my boots. The house had settled back into its old shape overnight, but the envelope on the counter held its place like a nail in green wood. I set it in the truck, took the ledger with yesterday's note, afternoon visitors, and told myself the day had a sequence: courthouse, attorney, cafe, specialist, if I could find one. The square wore wreaths and clean flags. On the courthouse lawn, a plywood manger leaned against a bale. Nora's office had a window that let winter light in clean. Case binders lined one wall by county name. A framed clipping thanked her for work with elders. She didn't waste minutes. She ran the notary number through a state database I didn't need to see to believe and nodded once. Revoked before this date, she said, tapping the seal. That's not a bruise, that's a break. She spread the deed on a blotter and read not like a person reading words, but like a person reading terrain. When she reached the addendum, her mouth moved into something like a half smile. Your father's lawyer had poetry, she said. The clause lay there in plain English, a bit of old-fashioned caution set into law. Any transfer without the owner's signature between December 24th and 26th is void and reverts title. A sentence simple enough to carve on a gate. A lifeline is not a rescue, it is something to grab while you learn how to swim again. Nora laid out steps in a tidy grid. We would file an emergency request to put brakes on recording or closing until that clause could breathe. We would demand the doctor's certification, test it against my bank logs and vendor signatures from last week, and challenge any claim of decline with receipts and initials in my hand. We would map Silver Mesa's claimed chain of title and identify where paper must pass: escrow, recorder, any office open during a holiday week. Speed, she said, and discipline. If you bring me media, we tag and bag it. No copy onto a computer that breathes on the internet. Chain of custody keeps truth from being argued into fiction. I could feel anger searching for a way to wear my mouth, but I had another uniform that fit better: precision. I inventoried the day the way I inventory drip lines before heat. I had my ledger with recent numbers, bank statements with my signature, receipts from a diesel delivery and Micron filters, the deed with my father's careful addendum, and a friend who knew a seal from a stamp. We set tomorrow's morning for filings. Nora printed a checklist: dates, offices, phone numbers, a line to write down the name of any clerk who touched our paper. I folded it into my wallet like field orders. On the sidewalk, the sky had the bright color winter wears just before it remembers it is winter. Bells from the church tested carols and drifted down Main Street with the smell of butter. Dusk slid along the rows by the time I turned up the drive. The windmill stepped against a whitening sky. I placed the folder by the front door and set 2 alarms, one for bank hours, one for dawn field checks because work tomorrow still needed to look like work. I washed the mug, laid a clean rag over Lena's loppers in the shop, and wrote 3 words on the ledger line for the day. Sequence holding steady. The house breathed the way a house breathes when a plan has been spoken to it, and I let that be enough for one night. Night pressed close to the windmill when I shouldered a hard case and crossed the yard. The tower's silhouette cut the sky into darker pieces. The bunker lock took the key with a familiar click, and that cool, mineral smell rose like a kept promise. I flicked on a low beam, set the case on the bench, and opened the small safe where I keep the dry things that don't belong on a computer with a pulse. The trail cam hard drive sat wrapped in shop towels. 2 spare SD cards rode in a tin. The steel tag stamped with our bank box number was cold against my palm. I wrote the time in my ledger, slipped on nitrile gloves, slid each item into an evidence bag, pressed the zip, laid tamper tape, and signed my initials across the seam. Nora's checklist lay open beside me like a catechism. Date, time, initial. Do not plug into anything that breathes the internet. Label the direction the camera faced. I did what the paper said and what habit already knew how to do. Upstairs, I cleared a spot on the table, set the hard case down, and took out the little write blocker Nora had sent home with me, one of those simple gates that lets you read a drive without touching it. The laptop stayed offline. Directory names blinked into place and then stopped as if holding their breath. I didn't open files. I noted timestamps. Midnight runs showed up like fence posts, headlights near the north draw, a pattern of minutes around 2 and 3 in the morning, signatures a thief leaves because he thinks the night is a blanket. At opening bell, I parked under the live oaks near the bank and signed the vault log with a steady hand. The camera in the ceiling watched me watch myself. The safe deposit box gave up Lena's journals bound in blue, a bundle of clipped receipts, and a narrow folder with her tidy tabs. She had flagged passages about anonymous calls, warning of night pumping, and kept an invoice from a company named Longhorn Water Logistics with a reference line that didn't fit any work we'd ever ordered. I asked the teller to make certified copies and stamp the time, returned the originals to the box, and slipped the steel tag back into my pocket, the way a man returns a coin to a pocket for luck he doesn't believe in but respects. Nora logged the media into her chain of custody form, each bag a line, each line a signature. She slid on gloves, took a forensic image without letting my drive touch her office network, and built an exhibit stack. The deed with my father's Christmas clause, the notary commission printout with the word revoked, neat as a verdict, bank statement signed in my hand within the past 30 days, fuel and filter receipts, Lena's flagged entries establishing that suspicion had a calendar older than yesterday. "We go for a stay," she said, tapping the motion. Clause plus fraud indicators plus imminent harm. The courthouse hallway smelled of old wood and peppermint from a bowl by the clerk's window. Holiday docket days have a hollow sound, the kind you get when a building waits for a crowd that never comes. Reeves took the bench and stared past us as if through glass. Nora walked him through the clause. Plain language, plain dates, plain reversion. She pointed to the revoked notary, to my recent signatures, to the risk that a recording made during a thin holiday staff window could do damage that a January hearing could not unring. He shuffled papers, left the bench for a recess that had no reason, and returned with a voice that spoke in phrases cut from a template. Insufficient showing. Alternative remedies. Holiday staffing. He set a hearing date comfortably beyond the 26th. We stood in the hallway where sound falls out of the air. Nora's jaw worked once, then stilled. "We pivot to enforcement," she said. "Keep your evidence sealed. We'll track the title path and notify escrow and recorder that the clause exists, but assume motion will not hold them." I nodded. Anger wanted to take my mouth. I made room for precision instead. A denial isn't an ending. It's a map of who's on the other side of the river. On the steps, I called a number Marty had given me for a ranger who knows water. The voice that answered clipped his name as if cutting line, Del Toro. I offered what I could, time-stamped media, map of the North Draw, a ledger of midnight intervals, bank logs that prove I sign what I say I sign. "Bring it," he said. "We'll intake today." Maps of the county's veins hung on the ranger office wall, blue lines for watercourses, red flags for complaints that turned into cases. Del Toro asked for pump models, hose diameters, access lanes that don't leave ruts seen from the road, neighbor sight lines, and the make of the trucks I'd noticed when sleep didn't come easy. He spoke statutes without decoration. He said the words probable caused the way a mechanic says torque spec. "We'll verify on site and coordinate with county and TCEQ," he said. "If we see what you think we'll see, we'll watch it at night." Marty met me at the cafe with a coffee and the look a man wears when his back knows a pack is about to go on it again. We used the county clerk's public terminal and walked the last year like a fence line. The instrument we needed blinked at us from a June date. A quitclaim touching water and use rights, grantor pointing at my tract in language that made legal sense until it looked at me. The signature resembled my name the way a coyote print resembles a dog's, close until you measure the splay. Initials wrong, date wrong, strokes too eager. The notary block was stamped by the same revoked commission. The recording number linked to a private loan file where collateral wasn't land but beneficial use rights, and a beneficiary address led to a mailbox suite rented by a startup with my son's name on its filings. I sat with that a minute, grief tightened behind my breastbone, then went somewhere I could use it. I would let sworn facts do the tearing. I would not let my water, my land, or my name leave my possession by fraud or by my temper's mistake. Del Toro took copies, requested a site map with shaded arcs of typical night approach, and set a time. "Tonight," he said, "you'll brief, then stay back." Nora added quitclaim fraud to her notes, drafted notices to escrow and recorder, and told me to keep the media in the hard case unless her hands or a badge were there to touch it. Dusk found me in the rows writing observation plan across a clean ledger page. The windmill turned a thin degree against a pale sky. First we prove the water, I thought, then the rest will have to answer to gravity. Tomorrow would pull me to a glass tower in the city and then back down to the North Draw at an hour when decent people let the dark pass without watching it. I tightened one last clip on a trellis wire and walked home in a straight line. I could walk again in my head if I had to. The tower downtown rose like a blade of winter glass, all polish and angles, the lobby dressed in stone and poinsettias that looked too red to be real. Security gates sighed open after a badge flash from a receptionist with a smile that ended at her cheeks. I carried a rigid folder and my farm coat still holding the smell of mineral dust. The floor numbers pinged upward as if counting down to a place I would not belong. The conference room faced a sky scrubbed clean by northerly wind. Bottled water stood at parade rest beside artisan crackers as thin as promises. Victor Lang arrived with the crispness of a pressed shirt that had never met a clothesline. His watch ticked like a metronome you could hear if you wanted to. He laid a folder on the table as if setting a ritual in motion. He spoke the vocabulary of soft steel, words sanded by PR, each one carrying the force of money that expects to be obeyed. "We want an amicable transition," he said, and slid a one-page proposal forward. $100,000 to smooth relocation. We can arrange top-tier senior living. I did not touch the paper. The room held the faint hum of a hidden air system, white noise designed to make any objection sound small. I named what I came to name. I told him about the night pumping at the North Draw, about the hose diameter and the skid pump's serial plate, about timestamps that stitched themselves between 2 and 3 in the morning like contraband mending. I cited the generator's model and the coupling size as if reciting a creed. He did what men like him do when detail is a blade. He fogged. He said phrases like regional water partnerships and temporary testing and compliance teams. He said he could ask the right people to look into it. He paused only twice, once when I said the exact hose size, once when I named the hours. His pen hovered over nothing, then resumed a tidy march. The skyline reflected off the glass table and made his hands look like they were underwater. I let silence carry my refusal. There is a way to leave a room without giving it your hand. I gathered my folder. As the door breathed shut, a side panel of glass revealed a figure stepping out of Victor's suite. The elevator bank took her quickly, but a temporary guest badge swung once against a cream blouse I had seen in other city photographs. Brooke moved with the posture of someone conversant with lobbies like this. It took a heartbeat for my eyes to marry the image to every other fact in my ledger. I did not follow. I didn't speak her name. I let the elevator doors take what they were carrying. On the highway home, the cab filled with the hum of tires and the simple order of lines. I filed details for Nora like I would file field notes. Lobby camera angles, floor number, the red stripe on a guest badge, time bracket wedged between the elevator pings. I set the corridor glimpse of Brooke beside the revoked notary and the quitclaim that looked like my name only to those who do not know my hand. Patterns began to touch. Night opened its gate at the north draw without asking permission. Yucca and mesquite took on the shapes they always take when you move without light. Marty met me at the pull-off where road dust settles into a pocket of quiet. Ranger Del Toro arrived last. Truck lights already killed, the door closing with the soft finality of a man who prefers verbs to adjectives. Equipment came out without chatter: thermal monocular, a handheld camera with a time overlay, low-lumen headlamps with tape across the lenses, radios turned to whisper. We went crosswind so scent wouldn't carry down the lane. Knees found old cow tracks by memory. Ankles rolled where limestone is kind. Feet knew where wire elbows once snagged trouser hems. I named landmarks in my head the way I named stakes when I laid the trellis. Split limestone, scarred mesquite, the square shadow of the pump house foundation that remains from when my father thought a shed would solve weather. Del Toro gave a small hand signal and we flattened into cover. 3 pickups idled with their headlights hooded, hoods up like open mouths. A portable pump sat on a skid and said its name in a steady thrum. Hoses wormed toward the waterline, their ribs catching the little light there was. Del Toro moved like a man who has counted steps before and will count them again under oath. He photographed the model plate and the generator's serial, measured hose diameter with a quick wrap of a marked tape, documented couplers and the paint pattern on the skid. Marty logged times to the minute. I set a small sound meter on a rock and clipped the reading to the ledger of timestamps from the trail cam directory. The runtime walked in lockstep with what the drive had already whispered, minutes that are always chosen by people who prefer not to be seen. A guard's flashlight cut the brush hard enough to make the yucca tips pale. I counted a slow 5 with the wind's cadence, breath sliding through my nose the way you do when you do not want the chest to move. The beam held, combed, then decided our patch of dark was not interesting. A radio squawk from the trucks covered our small shift into deeper cover. The pump's thrum kept its beat. Del Toro's voice came in the smallest possible ribbon. "We have enough. Out." He pointed us to a dry gully that would land us below the truck line. We took it by feel. No headlamps until the last bend where road and safety shake hands. At the vehicles, nobody said what was personal. The ranger spoke in next steps: process images, draft affidavits, coordinate with county and TCEQ, continue observation with angles that prove flow, not only machinery. He shook my hand once, the way men do when they know a longer battle is just beginning. The Brooke image moved inside me like a thorn that will have to be removed with care or not at all. I filed it under provable things: badge, floor, time. Stories live soft, patterns live hard. I chose patterns. I would give Nora the building facts, not my hurt. In the truck cab light, I wrote a single line in the ledger: 23rd December, city fog, 2340 to 215, water proven in motion. Wind lifted a cold ribbon over the draw. Pumps thudded their distant drums as if insisting the night belonged to them. The highway back to the house felt longer than its miles. Tomorrow would bring Caleb's plea and Nora's pivot from the judge's denial, and a photo leak would tell me why holiday docket calendars sometimes refuse to see. And then I would make a call that men like Victor think they can control, the kind of call that sets a Christmas night in motion. Dawn came thin and bright over the trellis, a kind of cold that makes metal speak when you touch it. I walked the rows to let my hands remember what steadiness feels like. The ledger lay open on the tailgate with last night's line, water proven in motion, underlined once for courage. Grit sat behind my eyes, but the kind that holds, not crumbles. I tightened 2 clips, checked the frost fan, and listened to the pump house breathe like an animal asleep but alert. Caleb's tires whispered up the drive while the sun was still low. He stepped out alone, tie loosened, the quick glance of a man measuring exits. He stood on the porch as if the boards might choose to support him or not. "We need to stop fighting," he said. "Everyone loses if this keeps going." The words had the practiced shape of compromise, but they landed like a rehearsal he did not believe. He spoke of the holidays, good buyers, smooth transitions, the way a facility could be close to specialists. He did not say debt. He implied it like a shadow you notice only when the light moves. I asked one question, family or money, and watched him step around it the way a man steps around a coiled hose he hopes is a rope. I let the quiet do the rest. It was not the moment for sermons. He left with his shoulders set for a meeting he would not describe. Nora called mid-morning with a voice that walked directly to the point. The denial stood. The Rangers' night validated activity. The next move should make intent stand up in daylight, bait and document, then let badges assemble the larger picture. Preserve the evidence, she said. Keep your routine predictable. We set a controlled contact. You offer verification, not consent. I wrote the verbs in the ledger so that my temper would not write its own. Marty forwarded a photo that placed the courthouse in a clearer frame. Judge Reeves at a narrow table with a woman whose profile I recognized later through a staff directory as Victor's sister. The timestamp pressed itself against the hour he recessed us yesterday. I filed it as context, not conviction, and traced the restaurant's name, the table position by a row of frosted windows, the server's apron color. Details live longer than outrage. The moral math did not take many numbers. A man can love a son and still bar the door against the harm that son has brought home. Land, water, name. If I made my peace with losing any one of those because I feared a fight, I would teach my bones something I could not make them unlearn. I chose lawful confrontation. Truth would be gathered in daylight and sprung at night in a circle of headlights that did not belong to thieves. Del Toro answered on the second ring and spoke operational. A pretext call would do. I would propose verification before any handover. The hour should match the usual pumping window. The place would be the north draw quadrant where cover and approach allowed control. We set radios to whisper, mapped staging points, and agreed on a single-word trigger. Insurance, I said, testing the syllables. He repeated it once and clicked off. At the kitchen table, I spread a county map and sketched the approach lanes I have walked since I could lace boots, the low swale that eats footsteps, the line of yucca that breaks a silhouette, the elbow of fence where a man can tuck in without leaving a straight mark. Winter wind prefers a certain quarter here. I traced it and penciled where a camera crew could stand downwind without their breath turning to steam on air. Words can do harm when they're not trained, so Nora and I trained mine. We drafted the call on paper, an opening that said I had found a hand-drawn map, a description that promised verification before I handed over anything, a condition that debts attached to my son be cleared, and no sentence that could be read as consent to take. I copied the script into the ledger as if I were writing drill commands so that when nerves tried to improvise, ink would stay the hand. I made the call from a landline she could record. Victor answered with a smoothness that implied he had been waiting. I gave him the line about the map and the word insurance, like a coin dropped on a table. I offered midnight on Christmas at the ranch to verify the spot. He tugged at details, and I let only the quadrant of the north draw out into the light. When he agreed, the room felt colder, the way a field feels colder when cloud edge covers sun. Del Toro texted a time and a grid. Tactical position settled. County PIO would give a local news crew a quiet invitation under embargo. Overwatch optional. Arrests contingent on behavior. The plan read like a clean fence line. I breathed easier inside that order. A text from Caleb pinged around noon. He asked about movers and gave a time window for the 26th. He added that development folks had environmental questions and wanted to do a short walkthrough. I replied with a single word, noted, and wrote the timestamp down. A net tightens fastest when the man inside believes there is no net. Afternoon fell into its work. I resealed the media case, added the day's call log to Nora's file, double-locked the bunker, and labeled spare radio batteries. I printed a card with emergency contacts and slid it in my shirt pocket, the way a man slides a prayer where the heart still listens. I left a note for Marty under the salt shaker. If I don't answer by dawn on the 26th, call Nora and Del Toro. Ritual is how a person tells himself he is still himself. I oiled Lena's loppers and folded the edge of her quilt back over the tin box in the closet. I set the percolator with grounds measured by memory and filled the kettle for a pre-dawn flame. Her hymn hummed thin in my throat without words. I stood at the sink until the window turned into a mirror of trellis against pale sky and said my father's line again, land, water, name, and added one more for this season. Patterns, not stories. Outside, the windmills took one slow notch and held. The church down the road rehearsed a carol that carried on the air like a promise you would not break in front of children. I drew a line in the ledger. 24th December, choice made, bait set for 25th December, 2400 hours. Then I turned off lights in rooms that had learned my footsteps and let the house keep watch until the night did what it always does, gather itself and wait. Christmas night came down like a sheet of tin, dry cold, sound carried thin and far. I parked in the pull-off we'd marked and cut the lights. The hard case rode on the passenger seat like a second witness. Radios, spare batteries, grease pencil, checklist. Each item found its pocket, then I found my breath and slowed it until it didn't steam on the air. Del Toro rolled in behind me without headlights, door shutting with the discretion of a man who knows how to keep noise from waking the wrong thing. He gave the briefing quick. Overwatch optional. Arrest team staged down gully. KXAN crew held downwind under the county PYO's leash. We would move on lanes we had walked a dozen times in our heads. Yucca took our shapes and made them into brush. We slipped through the dry gully and watched the draw flatten into a dish of cold metal. Cameras were already pre-positioned, their sight lines braided to catch hose runs, serial plates, and license frames in one sweep. Marty crouched by a mesquite scar with a notepad and a pen that would write even if the ink decided not to. The wind sat in the north, pinning our breath against our own collars. Headlights arrived in a practice sequence. 3 pickups idling with hood lights hooded, Victor's SUV ghosting in last. A generator thumped. A skid pump slid off a trailer on ratchet straps that had done this before. Men I didn't know moved like they could back a trailer in the dark without touching a fence post. Brooke stepped out from the second truck in a heavy coat. The badge lanyard she wore vanished under the collar when she tucked it, the reflex of someone who's been told to hide in plain sight. Caleb was with them, face thinned by a week of bad sleep, eyes quiet like a man trying not to be seen by the thing in his own chest. I walked into the spill of hooded light with my hands visible and my voice even. The script lived in my mouth where panic couldn't reach. Verification before anything, I said. I have a map. We check the quadrant, then we talk. Any debts on my son come clean as a condition. I gestured in the general direction of the north draw without pointing at a single contour I could later be accused of revealing. Victor wanted to turn air into agreement. He pressed for coordinates and called the work testing, his tone sanded to a hotel lobby quiet. I kept the ledger line in my head, no consent. Brooke watched me the way you watch a storm you haven't decided to call a storm yet. Caleb looked at the ground. I turned my shoulder as if to indicate risk coverage and said the word we had chosen to mean a different thing. Insurance. Radios clicked once like insects tapping stone. The dark around us gathered itself and became perimeter. Sheriff's office, Texas Rangers, don't move. Light raked equipment, not faces. Hands went up. A ranger's voice explained the next 90 seconds in clauses that would read well in a transcript. Hoses coiled where they ran, the pump's plate shone in a glare that made it plain. KCOPS. AN's camera lens found angles the PIO had cleared, recording commands and machinery and a timestamp like a courthouse clock in the corner of the picture. Del Toro moved through it like a measuring tape, chalking hose diameter, photographing couplers, reading generator specs into a small recorder that made no editorial sound. A sound meter clipped a reading that would pair with flow assumptions later. Marty wrote times to the minute. The minute didn't argue. 2 technicians wore cuffs by the time the word unauthorized diversion left a ranger's mouth. The man styled as a site engineer accepted a citation as if receiving a package he had signed for before. Brooke tried to step away into the unlit space between trucks and yucca. A ranger stopped her with a palm and asked for ID and a statement. She was advised she might be involved in fraud. She wasn't arrested. Caleb stood where a ranger set him, uncuffed, hands visible, ashen. He looked at me once. I kept my eyes on the equipment. No words, not because I had none, but because the only ones worth speaking tonight would be sworn. Del Toro's phone buzzed against his chest. He put it to his ear, listened, and gave the smallest nod. County Records Liaison had logged a relationship we suspected, Judge Colton Reeves, Victor's brother-in-law by marriage. A fact to screen conflict, not an accusation yet. At almost the same moment, Nora's runner slid a notice into the recorder's after-hours box and pinged escrow by email. The deed's Christmas clause exists and speaks in plain text. The PIO turned to the KXAN lens and issued one sentence no lawyer could quarrel with. We are investigating an unauthorized diversion. We note a recorded deed states that any transfer lacking the owner's signature within December 24th to 26th is void and reverts title. Not names, not heat, just the shape of the law set beside the shape of the night. Chain of custody moved like drill. Seized items logged, media cards cloned and hashed on site. My hard case remained sealed. My initials went only where Nora would later ask for them. Hoses were snaked and bagged, the skid recorded for removal under warrant. Trucks left one by one after IDs. Brooke departed separately. Caleb agreed to ride into town for an interview. A ranger tailed me to the pull-off to make sure I didn't collect more followers than I wanted. The PIO gave the brief the public requires and the law allows. Resource crimes under review, elder fraud and document irregularities under parallel inquiry, Attorney General's office looped for coordination. The air held its cold steady as if to remind us that weather doesn't change because papers do. I filed what hurt under what proved. Patterns, not stories. At the house, dawn edged the windmill and made its blade into a sliver of pewter. I set the ledger on the table where Lena used to cool pies and wrote a line that would carry its own weight if ever stripped for parts. 25th of December, code word spoken, perimeter closed, clause invoked, water defended. Then I rinsed a cup, set it upside down on a towel, and let the house keep the other kind of watch, the kind that listens for the next knock and doesn't fear it. Morning arrived not as triumph, but as a settling of dust. Steam rose from the percolator like a thin ribbon, and the ledger on the table held last night's line. Code word spoken, perimeter closed, clause invoked, water defended. I traced it with a fingertip and put the book away. The rows outside were quiet in the crisp after-cold. Frost crisped the grass between trellises, and the pump house breathed the low, even hush of machinery at rest. Nothing had been disturbed. The land felt like itself again, a dog returning to heel after a scare. On the radio, the county station cleared its throat and read facts with holiday restraint. Rangers investigate unauthorized water diversion. The Attorney General's office is opening a special inquiry into resource crimes and elder fraud allegations, coordinating with TCEQ and the county. No names, no adjectives, just the sound of gears beginning to mesh. I wrote the agencies in the margin of a notepad because timelines matter more than tone. Silver Mesa pushed its statement by 10. Temporary testing, it said, undertaken in compliance with regional partnerships, full cooperation promised. Passive verbs, nouns without subjects, a shine that avoids fingerprints. I printed it, circled the soft spots, and clipped it to Nora's folder. Language is evidence when you know how to hold it. Nora called with the steadiness of a pilot reading instruments. Recorder and escrow had acknowledged the Christmas clause notice. Title flagged. Any close, now void or voidable. She would add the quitclaim fraud to filings, send preservation letters to Silver Mesa and Longhorn Water Logistics, and alert lenders and insurers so nobody could claim ignorance after the fact. Minimal public comment, she said. Sign your formal statement today. I signed, attaching scans of bank logs, diesel and filter receipts, and ledger excerpts that show the simple math of a present-mind man. Ink dries fast in winter air. Del Toro checked in next. Chain of custody was clean. Seized gear was being logged and bagged. Affidavits were underway. He asked for my site sketch and the media index to be appended. I drove them into town, a simple map with wind arrows and safe lanes, and a careful list of file timestamps that pair with last night's meter readings. Probable cause grows teeth when every column aligns. By noon, a message came through counsel from Brooke. She wanted a proffer meeting, information in exchange for consideration. Her lawyer's line was scrubbed of personality, but the shape of it told its own story. She could speak to Victor's directives and investor relations back channels. Nora's stance was simple and correct. Any discussion flows through prosecutors, not through me. I remain a witness and make no personal deals. I agreed by keeping my mouth shut. Caleb texted and asked for 5 minutes before his interview. The porch only, I answered. He stood on the boards like a man who had found the edge he'd been pretending wasn't there. He admitted the quitclaim loan tied to his startup, his role in the forgery, the fear that pressed on him from both sides, retaliation and prison. I let the words sit between us like a bucket of water you don't trip over if you acknowledge it. Tell the whole truth with counsel, I said. He nodded once, and the nod looked like a rope, finally catching. The church deacon picked up on the second ring. I told him I wanted to donate a strip along the north draw for a community water preserve contingent on the county restoring flow and installing monitoring. He said the watershed group would be glad to map boundaries and signage. I asked for a simple plaque, no names, just a sentence about stewardship. A gift is better when it points away from the giver. Paper keeps justice moving even when the heart wants newsreels. I sat in Nora's conference room and signed a witness statement that stuck to what could be proved. She dispatched litigation hold notices and lender alerts before I finished the second cup of firm coffee. Bells from the square kept their practice carols in the background, and for once I was grateful for other people's rituals. Town had the hum a small town gets when it knows something and isn't sure how to say it. At the hardware store, a man I'd hauled fence with nodded, eyes curious and careful, respect in one lane, wait and see in the next. Power has a way of making people economical with their faces. I filed the observation without resentment. I don't require faces to agree with me to know a row is straight. The county PIO called to thank me for keeping to protocol. He framed the public boundaries, existence of investigation, resource protection focus, no names. I wrote one clean sentence in the ledger to keep my mouth honest if a microphone found me at a bad time. A man can talk himself into trouble faster than he can drive there. Del Toro texted an operations grid for the week, additional night observations, a daytime retrieval of equipment under warrant. Nora blocked court dates for initial appearances and warned that Silver Mesa might toss civil counters into the stream to muddy it. Documentation would carry us through. My task list fit on one page. Keep routines predictable. Answer the phone when the badge rings. Write down names and times until writing them down feels like breathing. I changed nothing and a little. Motion lights on the barn, neighbor check-ins, a spare radio battery on the nightstand. I handed Marty a sealed envelope, map, contacts, and instruction he already knew. If I go quiet, push these to Nora and Del Toro, and do not wait on my pride. Precaution is not fear. It's a gate that keeps honest things honest. By late afternoon, I walked to the north draw with a can of oil and a rag. The gate hinge took the oil like an apology and swung smooth. County techs had tested valves. I could hear clean water ticking in the line, a sound as small as a needle on a record, as important as a signature on a deed. Hoses had left scars in the grass that would green over when winter turned. I stood on the dirt that would be the preserve and let myself believe in repair. Not absolution. Repair. Evening laid its blue on the hills. I wrote my entry where the ledger belongs. 26th of December. AG inquiry. Title flagged. Brooke seeks proffer. Caleb to confess. North draw, preserve in motion. The wind lifted lightly and reset the windmill one notch. I pocketed the witness copy receipt and walked home steady, a man between days, carrying law the way you carry water when you know every drop has a place to be. Winter moved in weeks and files. What began on a cold Christmas night expanded into calendars stamped, hearings posted, and the slow clack of systems admitting what they'd seen. I kept the ledger on the table and a banker's box under it, not because I loved paper, but because order is how you keep from drowning in other people's noise. The first hard click came from the grand jury. Indictments rolled out like fence staples. Conspiracy, bribery, obstruction, unauthorized diversion of water. The names were typed where the law requires names, and Victor Lang sat among them as plain as any noun. I didn't cheer. I wrote the counts on a yellow line and moved on. A few days later, the state announced that Judge Colton Reeves was suspended pending inquiry, conflict of interest records entered, disciplinary docket opened. The words didn't undo the holiday denial, but they put a light where a light belonged. Civil paper followed. Recorder acknowledged the deed notice. Escrow processed a voidable determination that read like a drawn breath. The Silver Mesa sale was voided. Title reverted the way winter river water returns to a channel after a jam breaks. The clerk's certified confirmation came in a beige envelope. Nora made copies, sent them to lenders and insurers, and marked the loop closed with a sticky note and a date that made the box in my chest feel less tight. Brooks' counsel arranged a proffer with prosecutors. What she brought turned to wire. Investor relations emails, calendar entries, notes from pre-sale meetings where words like timing and visibility did more work than their size. She pled down to reduced counts and left court with probation, community service, and restitution in a share that acknowledged her role without pretending she'd invented the machine. I saw her only once after, in a fluorescent room at the watershed office, filling boxes with riparian plant plugs for a volunteer day. Accountability doesn't require proximity. I went back to my truck without being seen. Caleb stood in a different courtroom with a different air in it. He read his allocution in a voice that had learned to step where the floor holds. He pled to forgery and fraud counts tied to the quitclaim and the paper he'd let other people shape with his name. The judge gave him 3 years with a work program recommendation, restitution, and a cooperation condition he'd already started to honor. I didn't try for pride in the moment. There's none to be had in that room, but I let respect sit where it could, on the fact of a hard truth spoken with no varnish. Outside, before processing, he asked if he could walk 1 row. 1, I said. We didn't trade promises. I set a clear expectation. Repay what you broke. Start with truth. He nodded once. A rope caught. Silver Mesa's parent layers unraveled under filings the way hay twine gives if you pull in the right direction. Longhorn Water Logistics slid into a forensic audit. Subcontractors went on a DBAR list that makes phones go quiet. None of it made me taller. It only made the outline of the thing clearer. Systems move when pushed by facts. Repair moved too. The county signed an MOU to restore north draw flow and install telemetry with quarterly public reports. TCEQ posted a monitoring schedule that would make a bureaucrat proud and a rancher patient. I pinned the calendar in the shop and wrote the service intervals on the back door with a grease pencil because a door you touch remembers better than a screen. The $10,000 that started like insult ended like a receipt. I wrote a check to the Watershed Fund, memo line, returned where it should have gone, and filed the acknowledgement in Nora's box. If money can be taught, that's how. Send it where its work improves the thing it came from. We launched a small program in the Rose, not therapy with clipboards, just work that steadies hands. The church, the veterans group, and I set pruning days, irrigation classes, and quiet hours when a man could walk a line until he remembered his own cadence. On the first morning, 5 of us learned how to tie clips without snapping them. We took readings from moisture probes and argued, in the old way, about whether coffee tastes better from a thermos or from a tin mug warmed on a truck manifold. Laughter came like a thaw. The preserve took shape along the draw. Fencing went up where it needed to and nowhere else. A plaque on a cedar post read a single sentence about stewardship. No names. County techs brought a tablet and showed school kids the telemetry, a blue line rising when valves opened and settling when they closed. I stayed at the edge and let the deacon talk. The land does better when more voices own a piece of its story. There was one last civil hearing, the kind that feels like sweeping sawdust after a long build. The court entered the order voiding the transfer and released the lis pendens. The clerk stamped the final sheet with a sound like an amen in a small church. Nora shook my hand once. "You held the line," she said. I answered with a nod and put the stamped page into the banker's box, where chain of custody forms and evidence receipts already lived under the word "closed," retain per counsel. I declined interviews. The county PIO's sanctioned sentence was the only one I used if someone found me at the feed store. An investigation into unauthorized diversion and related matters is ongoing. We're committed to resource protection, then I'd buy screws or vinegar and go home. Patterns, not stories. Law before anger. Evidence before emotion. House and land returned to ordinary time as if they'd only been holding their breath. The south fence stood straight, the olive press gasket sealed. Frost fans took their test spins without complaint. The windmill's click went back to background, and the bunker stayed sealed except for inventories I made less for fear than for the habit of keeping dry things dry. When the dedication day came, light laid itself across the rows like a promise made to no one in particular and kept anyway. Children's voices carried along the draw as the ribbon lifted and fell. I kept my place at the edge and felt Lena's pruning lesson in my hands. Let light through. On the walk back, I heard clean water tick inside the line and allowed a private exhale that didn't need to be witnessed. At the table that evening, I opened the ledger to a clean page and wrote an accountant's summary. Indictments entered, judge suspended, sale voided, restitution ordered, preserve created, program launched. I slid the witness copy receipt back into my wallet and closed the book. Ketcook reached, work continues. I stood, turned off the light, and let the wind take the next line. Winter eases here the way a bruise fades. Not all at once, and not without reminders if you press. At first light, I walk the rows, boots taking the same old measure between posts. The vines hold their winter shape. Short canes, clean cuts, buds tucked and waiting. Moisture darkens the soil in ribbons where the drip runs. My finger sinks and comes up cool. The land has returned to a rhythm that does not ask permission from worry. I check manifolds, count down spools of tie wire, pencil a parts order for the press gasket I've been meaning to replace. In the shop, a wrench lies where I left it, like an agreement between days. People talk about closure as if it were a door you get to shut with a satisfying click. I don't know that door. What I have is a gate I oil, swing, and latch each morning. If a storm bent it yesterday, I true it today. The ledger on the kitchen table is thinner than it was when all this began. Some pages carry the stiff weight of certified copies. Most carry pencil lines, flows, hours, names spelled correctly, the shape of what happened set down so it can't claim it happened another way. That is enough. Not the movie ending, just the truth lined up so a man can keep his back straight. I keep hearing my father's triad, but it has new grain in it now. Land, work you can prove with hands. Water, life you only hold by holding it with others. Name, the ledger of how you behaved when you were not being watched. Betrayal came for all three. Defense required all three to be claimed again. When you spend nights learning how to hold ground without hating the people trying to take it, you come to understand that stewardship is not a feeling. It is a practice. Caleb's face still visits some nights, the version from before and the one from the courtroom layered together until I can't separate them unless I stand up and walk. Love with no discipline would have kept him longer in a lie. Discipline without love would have used the law to salt his ground. I tried to split the difference and discovered the difference is a wire you hold tight in both hands, boundaries that don't tremble, a door not locked but not swinging. Fatherhood is not canceled by betrayal, it's reshaped. Whether we will ever share a row again is not my question to answer today. His work is his. Mine is to keep a path he can find if he ever learns to walk the way truth requires. There were dark hours when revenge sang in a key my bones remembered too easily. I wanted spectacle then, names read out loud, heads turned. The law doesn't sing that way. It stacks, stamps, schedules. It turns anger into paperwork with an engine behind it. Indictments, restitution, probation. The engine has a cost. Time, whispers on Main Street, sleep that comes late and leaves early. The gain is repair that lasts longer than a headline. I remind myself out loud sometimes. Patterns, not stories. Stories are what you tell yourself when you want to be the only righteous person in the room. Patterns are what wells run on and crops depend on. Season to season, check and recheck. Measurements that don't care whether you are tired or right. Irrigation schedules keep grief from running your life the way a broken valve will drain a tank while you're admiring the shine on the sensor. The preserve along the North Draw is small, but it works. On Wednesdays, school kids show up with curiosity and clipboards, and a county tech pulls up telemetry on a tablet. A blue line creeps and settles. Little hands trace it as if the graph were a living thing. Veterans come on Saturdays to prune and to be quiet beside one another without explaining anything. I set out buckets of clips and say little. Laughter carries farther than solitary anger. On a still day, you can hear it from the road. Now and then, a neighbor leans on the top wire while I check an emitter and offers me the kind of kindness men around here are comfortable with. Rows look strong this year, best I've seen them stand after a winter like this. I wipe my hands on my jeans and nod. They learned to stand together, I say. I did too. We talk weather and diesel and leave the rest to the wind. Brooke wears a different uniform now. Work gloves, a plain shirt with the Watershed logo, a daybook that tells her where to stack native grass plugs. I don't stand around to take a reading on her heart. Accountability is hers to carry. Caleb sends 2 letters a month from a place that has its own schedules and rules. Sometimes he writes about the work program, how tying rebar makes his hands ache in a useful way. I write back with the same 2 lines every time. Do the whole truth. Make restitution in full. Love is not a release from consequence. If there is a bridge in our future, it will be because he builds the first span. It is honest to admit the ache remains. Night still has its hours. When I feel it climbing my ribs, I get up, put on a coat, and walk a boundary. Lena walks with me in the practical ways she always did. Let light through, she said of pruning, and she meant more than vines. I stop at the windmill and put a drop of oil where the hinge asks for it. Water ticks in the line, steady as a pulse. The sound means the thing we defended is doing what it was made to do. One afternoon, a veteran holds a coil of drip tape and looks up, eyes rimmed but clear. This helps, he says, rolling the plastic straight with slow hands. It keeps my head from going places it shouldn't. I hand him a clip and feel the answer arrive without needing polish. Me too, I say. He smiles at the row like it's a narrow road he can manage. By evening, I've set out tomorrow's tools, written 1 more parts number on a card, and flipped the percolator basket to dry. I open the ledger and give myself a final line that does not need a stamp to be true. Patterns held. Stewardship secured. Work continues. I set down the pencil and listen to the house accept the sentence. Out in the near dark, the wind nudges the windmill, and it answers with a single click. You can only hear if you already know the sound exists. Guard what's yours, the old men said when I was young. I would add a clause. Guard it with law and with light. Not because light is kinder, though it is, but because light lasts. When morning comes, I'll walk the rows and keep them open enough for it to pass through. In the end, what remains isn't the echo of a courtroom stamp or the bright blink of a headline. What remains is quieter and more durable. A gate that swings true, clean water ticking through a line, and a name that can be spoken without flinching. The larger lesson is simple enough to carve on a fence post. Hold fast to 3 things: land, water, and name, and let the light through. Land is the work of the hands, the proof the body keeps when the world grows loud. It anchors values that cannot be negotiated away when calendars and contracts try to hurry you past your own conscience. Land is not just acres, it is the habit of stewardship, mending a fence instead of complaining about the wind, pruning what is overgrown so new fruit can find the sun. It teaches scale and patience. It reminds us that repair is not a speech but a set of repeated motions, sometimes for years. Water is life shared, the current that runs between neighbors, the resource that becomes more itself when guarded together. When water is stolen, it isn't only a statute that breaks, trust breaks. To defend water is to say, without theatrics, that common good is not for sale. It is to insist on telemetry and reports and valves that click when they should, so the next child who cups a palm at a spigot drinks without wondering who took more than their share in the night. Water tells the truth because it can't be scripted. It flows or it doesn't, and the instruments don't care about anyone's favorite story. Name is the ledger of conduct written in choices made when no one is watching. It can be inherited in outline, damaged in a day, and rebuilt only by the slow economy of honesty. A good name doesn't require applause. It requires alignment, the pattern of act, word, and record pointing in the same direction. When the name is threatened by lies, the repair begins with facts, not slogans. Timestamps, signatures, chain of custody, the courage to say, "I don't know," when you don't, and "I was wrong," when you were. These three, land, water, name, are attacked most easily when the heart is tired or when convenience dresses itself up as care. That's why the counterweight has to be discipline. Not the brittle kind that punishes for the pleasure of control, but the steady kind that returns a person to their principles when emotions want to spend what truth cannot afford. Discipline says, patterns, not stories. Measure before you accuse, document before you declare, call the law before you call the crowd. Justice, when it works, rarely looks like a movie. It looks like patient paper. Notices filed, exhibits attached, a stamp applied by a clerk who has also stamped 100 unremarkable deeds that day. It looks like an investigator who lets the evidence speak and a prosecutor who understands that truth has to survive cross-examination, not just gossip. It looks like consequences calibrated to behavior, restitution instead of revenge, probation where it can teach, time where it must. Its pace can feel unfair to pain, but its results last longer than humiliation ever does. Revenge performs well and stores poorly. It burns hot, then leaves you cold with the ash of what cannot be undone. Justice stores well and performs modestly. It leaves you with documents you can show the next skeptic and a conscience you can sleep beside. The point is not to win applause, but to keep the future from having to fight the same fire with fewer hoses. There is also the matter of love. Love without boundaries is sentimentality. Boundaries without love are bureaucracy. The task is to hold both at once, to care enough to name harm and still refuse to let bitterness become an heirloom. Accountability is not meanness. Mercy is not amnesia. A community grows strong when it practices both without confusing them. Repair, done right, radiates beyond the first wound. Protecting a resource becomes a lesson plan for a classroom, a workday for veterans relearning steadiness with their hands, a walking path where laughter travels further than anger ever did. What begins as defense can end as invitation. Come see how this works and take a piece of the habit home. In that sense, the quietest victories are the largest. They don't just settle a dispute. They train the next generation in how to disagree without destroying what they share. If there is a creed worth keeping after the dust settles, it might be this: guard what is yours with law and with light. The law brings weight and structure. The light brings sight and warmth. One without the other is either harsh or naive. Together, they make courage sustainable. They make it possible to say no without hatred and yes without fear. And when the night is long, and it will be, there are dependable things to reach for. Routine is not small. It is a form of prayer. Walk the rows, oil the hinge, balance the books to the dollar. Call the neighbor back. Write down the time and the name. Small, honest acts are a kind of levee against the flood of other people's shortcuts. The final word doesn't belong to scandal. It belongs to work, To the person who shows up the morning after the headlines and does the next right thing without witnesses. To the farmhand who keeps his hands clean when nobody notices. To the clerk who stamps fairly in a courthouse that forgot how to be famous. Quiet, repeated integrity is not glamorous, but it is undefeated across time. If this story rang true, perhaps it is because the details are ordinary. A table, a gate, a pump, a ledger. Most betrayals are ordinary too, clumsy, dressed up as efficiency, wrapped in soft words that avoid saying what is taken and from whom. The answer will always sound older than the problem. Name the act, hold the boundary, put it in writing, invite the law, and let the sunlight do what it was made to do. That's how a place is kept safe without becoming a fortress, and how a name stays usable without being polished into vanity. Thank you for staying with this journey. Stories like this are built from countless small hands, some holding cameras, some keeping records, many simply listening with care. If a thought rose in you while you watched, if a moment reminded you of a time when you had to choose between comfort and principle, share it. Your comments become maps for other people finding their way back to solid ground. Tell us where you're watching from and what line stayed with you. If you'd like more stories about resilience, stewardship, and the quiet ways justice works, subscribe and turn on notifications. It helps this community of listeners and builders grow, and it ensures you don't miss the next chapter. Most of all, keep practicing the disciplines that make repair possible in your own corner of the world. Measure twice, file the paper, turn on the light. The rest follows. And tomorrow, when the sun is up, walk your rows, whatever they are, and let the light through.